Good morning. I'm Mark Hammond, South Carolina Secretary of State. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to our first ever live raffle webinar. We understand that raffles are an important tool to raise money for many nonprofits. We want to inform those conducting raffles of the new laws passed since raffles became legal in 2015. These new laws have increased the amount an individual raffle ticket can be sold for, increased the prize amount for exempt raffles, changed the total prize amount for non-exempt raffles, and decreased reporting requirements with the Secretary of State's office. We hope this webinar will be beneficial to the nonprofit community. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to our General Counsel, Shannon Wiley, who will be followed by Kim Wickersham, Director of Public Charities. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn more about nonprofit raffles. As Secretary Hammond mentioned, they were legalized in South Carolina in 2015, and that was following the approval of a constitutional amendment by the voters in 2014. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to email your questions directly to charities@sos.sc.gov and put Raffles webinar in the subject line, and we will respond to your email. At this time, we will start going over the legal requirements for raffles in South Carolina. Okay, so the first question we need to answer is, what exactly is a raffle? And this is specifically defined in statute. South Carolina law defines raffle as a game of chance in which a participant is required to pay something of value for a ticket for a chance to win a prize, and the winner is determined by a random drawing or a similar process in which all participants have the equal chance of winning. So the key there is that something of value must be exchanged for that raffle ticket, whether it's a donation or someone buys a ticket. If you have a raffle in which no one has to pay anything to enter, or everybody is just, whether or not they pay or make a donation, they can still participate, that doesn't meet the raffle definition under the law. So the key is making that payment or donation in order to participate. And only certain types of nonprofit organizations are able to conduct raffles in South Carolina. So it's not enough just to be a nonprofit organization. You have to meet very specific legal requirements in order to conduct raffles. And there are really three prongs to this test of whether or not you can conduct a raffle. You have to look at what type of nonprofit organization it is, what's the purpose of the organization, and is the organization compliant with the South Carolina Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. So first, looking at the types of nonprofit organizations that can conduct raffles in the state. The first question to ask is whether or not you are tax exempt and tax exempt under a specific code of the IRS section governing exempt organizations. So in order to do a raffle, you have to either be a 501c3, a C4, a C6, C7, C8, C10, C19, or a 501d organization. If you're not tax exempt under one of those specific code sections, you have to be a class, department, or organization of an educational institution as defined under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. So when looking at what is an educational institution, think about your traditional school that has a curriculum, has students, has classes to teach the curriculum. It's not sufficient just to have an educational purpose. So to do any kind of raffle legally in the state of South Carolina, you either have to be tax exempt under one of the specific code sections, or you have to be associated with an educational institution. The next test to see whether or not you can conduct raffles is you have to look at the purpose of the organization. And under statute, the purpose has to be one of the following. It has to be religious, charitable, scientific, literary, educational, for the purpose of fostering national or international amateur sports competitions, or the prevention of cruelty to children or animals. If you don't have one of these purposes, you cannot legally conduct raffles within the state. Finally, you have to be compliant with the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. So for most organizations, that's going to mean that you have registered as a charitable organization with the Division of Public Charities of the Secretary of State's office, or you filed an application for registration exemption and you have it currently on file with our office. And that means that in order to do raffles, you have to have that registration on file in addition to any raffle registration you might be required to file. One thing to keep in mind is that churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship are not under the definition of charitable organization under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. So they are excluded from that definition. What that means when it comes to raffles is that a church or other house of worship does not have to register as a charity, but can still conduct raffles if it meets the other requirements. So that means that if you're a house of worship or a church, you don't have to file a charity registration just to conduct raffles. You might still have to file a raffle registration in order to conduct raffles. But that's where the term compliant comes in when it comes to the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. You have to comply with the act. So a church that is not registered under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act is still compliant and therefore can do raffles. You have to meet all three of these criteria in order to conduct raffles in the state. It's not a matter of meeting one of them or two of them. You have to do all three in order to legally hold a raffle in the state of South Carolina. So who can hold a raffle? Well, you have to be a nonprofit organization that is eligible to conduct raffles. Professional fundraisers are specifically barred from conducting raffles within the state under the laws governing nonprofit raffles. You cannot contract with another entity to do raffles on your behalf. You actually have to be the sponsor of the raffle. You can partner with another nonprofit organization that can do raffles, but you can't, farm out the responsibility for conducting the raffle to a professional fundraiser or other entity that cannot legally do raffles in the state of South Carolina. So when we look at raffle registration requirements, you have to look at whether or not the organization is exempt or non-exempt. And this might be confusing in the sense that, we talk about tax-exempt organizations and also whether or not an organization is exempt from registration under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. So now we're throwing another exempt term into the mix, and that's when it comes to raffles. So whether or not a raffle is exempt or non-exempt really depends on what sort of prize is offered to the participants in the raffle. There are some other requirements, but really we're going to look at prize amounts when it comes to differentiating between the two types of raffles. So to have an exempt raffle, it has to meet one of two criteria. The first type of exempt raffle is one in which there's a non-cash prize that is donated to the organization, or it can be a group of prizes, and the total value of the prize or prizes for the single raffle event are $950 or less. So you're looking at not only a small dollar value for that prize, but it has to be non-cash prize that's donated to the organization. It can't be a cash prize or one that is a non-cash prize that's purchased by the organization. It has to be donated. The second type of exempt raffle is a 50-50 raffle in which the raffle tickets are sold to members or guests of the nonprofit, and the total value of the proceeds collected is not more than $950. So a 50-50 raffle, for those of you who aren't aware of exactly what that is, that's where the participants in the raffle purchase the tickets for the raffle, and you'll have a pot of a certain amount of money, and they draw a winner, and the pot is then split in half by the winner and the charitable organization. So for example, for an exempt 50-50 raffle, the pot would be no more than $950, and the winner would get $475 and $475 would go to the charitable organization. One other factor with the 50/50 exempt raffle is the tickets can only be sold to members or the guests of that nonprofit. So they cannot be sold to members of the general public. So think about, like, say you have a Rotary Club who has a breakfast meeting every week and they have a 50/50 raffle. The only people that can buy those raffle tickets are the members of the organizations or guests they might bring to that event. You can't go just sell the tickets out on the street to members of the public. They have to be members or the guests of the organization. So if you're going to have exempt raffles, you should know that you can only have one exempt raffle a week. There is a time, a limited number you can do for non-exempt raffles as well, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But if you're going to have exempt raffles, it's once a week. So for non-exempt raffles, there is a significant prize amount increase. So the fair market value of a prize, a single prize that can be offered in a non-exempt raffle, is $80,000. And for a single raffle, and you have a group of prizes, those prizes cannot be valued together at more than $300,000. So that's really the key difference between exempt and non-exempt raffles. So you can look at, raffling off cars and boats, and this was actually increased very recently. So this was a change in the law last year. Before that, it was a maximum fair market value of $40,000. So as a nonprofit organization that can conduct raffles, you can have up to 4 non-exempt raffles a year. Again, this is differentiated from the exempt raffles where you can have 1 per week. And something to keep in mind too is you can have both exempt raffles and non-exempt raffles. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can do both as long as you stay within the legal requirements for holding those raffles. So if you're a nonprofit that does non-exempt raffles, or you do both exempt and non-exempt raffles, you have to file a raffle registration with the Secretary of State's office. If you only do exempt raffles, you do not have to register. But if you do any type of non-exempt raffle, you do have to file a registration for each year you hold those raffles. So the raffle registration process is very similar to the registration process for charitable organizations. You have to file a registration form each year that you do raffles, and there is a registration fee of $50. And this is a separate registration form than what you would file as a charitable organization under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. This raffle registration form is due the same time as your charity registration form is due, and that's 4.5 months after the end of your fiscal year. So if you have a calendar fiscal year from January 1st to December 31st, that due date is going to be May 15th. If you have a fiscal year date of July 1st to June 30th, and that due date is going to be November 15th. And there are different types of fiscal years that vary from those 2 most common fiscal years. The key thing to remember, it's due 4.5 months after the end of the fiscal year. So if you're a nonprofit organization that has separate chapters, and that typically you file one charity registration because you share an EIN, you can file a separate raffle registration for each chapter if the chapters want to do their own raffles and have up to 4 non-exempt raffles each year. So the thing to keep in mind, though, is if the chapters file their own raffle registration, they are responsible as well for filing their own raffle financial report. If you register to conduct raffles, you do have to file an annual raffle financial report with our office. Again, this is separate from the annual financial report that you would file for your charity registration. And this is also due at the same time as your raffle registration, 4.5 months after the end of the fiscal year. And just something to keep in mind, for those of you that are charitable organizations that register, you're probably familiar with the fact that with your charity financial report, you can request an extension from our office up to 6 months. For the Raffle financial report, there is no provision for extension. So that is always going to be due 4.5 months after the end of the fiscal year at the same time as your Raffle registration form. So the Raffle financial report has to contain the following information, and this information was actually streamlined last year, an amendment to the Raffle law. So something to keep in mind in terms of your financial records, you do need to maintain very detailed financial records for up to 3 years if you're conducting raffles, but the Raffle financial report itself has streamlined reporting requirements. So if you file the financial report for Raffle, you're going to have to report the total value of all prizes you've offered. That includes all cash prizes, all donated non-cash prizes, and all purchased non-cash prizes. You have to report the amount of tickets you've sold and the cost of each raffle ticket, the amount of gross receipts, and that's basically all the money you brought in from the sales of the raffle tickets, the amount of adjusted gross receipts, and that's going to be your gross receipts minus the amount you spent on cash prizes and non-cash prizes. You also have to include the total amount of any expenditures. For example, your raffle registration fee of $50. For example, any raffle tickets you bought, if you had an event specifically for that raffle, any party supplies for that event. And then you have to report the amount of your net receipts, and that's going to be your adjusted gross receipts minus your total expenses. And then each raffle financial report has to be signed and certified by the CEO and CFO of the nonprofit. Again, I just mentioned this previously, the actual raffle financial report itself has been streamlined, but you still have to keep very detailed financial records for your prize offerings, but who you paid for, any expenses, and how you've spent your net receipts from the raffle. And you have to keep these for 3 years, and they're open to inspection by law enforcement and the Secretary of State's office upon request. One of the requirements in the raffle law is that except for 50-50 raffles, you have to spend at least 90% of your net receipts from a raffle on the charity's purpose. So that means that following the deduction of prizes and expenses, 90% of that amount that's left over has to be used for your charitable purpose. And this is important when it comes to raffle advertisements. The raffle law has very specific requirements for raffle advertisements, and that includes that you have to disclose when you're advertising a raffle your true name of the organization that's sponsoring the event, what your charitable purpose is, and how for which the net receipts are going to be used. And also you have to include a statement of the proportion of the gross receipts of all raffles conducted in the previous 2 years that were not applied to charitable purposes. So in your raffle advertisement, you have to include language that basically explains how much you're devoting to your charitable purpose with the gross receipts from the raffles. And just to show you an example, this is not actually a legitimate raffle advertisement. This is one we made up for this presentation. But if you can look at this advertisement, you will see the highlighted sections are those that meet those raffle advertisement disclosure requirements. So as you can see for this raffle, the name of the organization would be Palmetto Pet Rescue, and the charitable purpose stated is to benefit local spay and neuter programs, so that would satisfy that requirement. And then we included a statement that since 2019, 75% of all raffle receipts have directly supported Palmetto Pet Rescue's charitable programs. So that disclosure statement would satisfy the percentage disclosure requirement under the raffle law. So it's really important when you advertise, you have to have all those factors in your advertisement, or you could be subject to a fine under the raffle law. Some other raffle restrictions and requirements just to keep in mind. The purchase price of a raffle ticket may not exceed $300. Originally it was $100 and it was recently increased to $300. You can't offer real property as a prize in a raffle. That basically means you can't raffle off a house or land. And this is something we've actually seen done before, or started to be done, and then we sent them a notice and they stopped. But you cannot raffle off a house. Also, when, and this is a question we get a lot, is, okay, how long can you sell raffle tickets before actually having the drawing? And the answer to that is 9 months. So basically, once you've sold one raffle ticket, you actually have to have that drawing no later than 9 months after the first raffle ticket is sold. And as far as timing for drawings, a raffle drawing for non-exempt raffle cannot be held between the hours of midnight and 10 a.m. So that means if you're going to have a raffle drawing on New Year's Eve, you have to do it before midnight, so you don't run afoul of that requirement. Also, you cannot have a raffle drawing on Christmas Day. So if you violate any provision of the raffle law, you would be subject to an automatic fine of $500 for each violation. And something to keep in mind too, some of you may be familiar with the violation process under the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act, where you get a notice of violation and then you have 15 days to cure the violation before the fine is assessed. Under the raffle law, there's actually no right to cure, period. It's an automatic fine of $500. And it can be also $500 for each violation and each day you're in violation of the law. So for example, if you're having a raffle and you are not authorized to do raffle, you can be fined $500 for each day from the time you started selling tickets to the time you had the drawing. And as you can see, that can add up a good bit. For raffle financial reports, the fine assesses at the amount of $10 per day, not to exceed $2,000 for each separate violation. So the raffle fine amount for financial reports is a little bit different. Now, just something to keep in mind, if you do get a notice of fine from our office, you can always reach out to our office to discuss any issues related to that fine. If there was, any problems with the filings or confusion, I mean, we work with organizations, and we're really happy to do so, especially since the law is relatively new. It's only 6 years old. You can also file an appeal in administrative law court. So if you have a fine or your registration suspended or revoked, or we deny your right to register as a raffle, you are always entitled to file an appeal with administrative law court within 30 days of receipt of the notice. So there is a right of appeal for each fine. So one thing to keep in mind, one of the questions we get is whether or not casino nights are legal, and the answer to that is not, no, not really. So a casino night is only legal if you have the event for entertainment purposes only and you don't offer any prizes, incentives, or financial rewards whatsoever. So it would just have to be for fun only and no real betting involved. So in most cases, for example, if you have a casino night, an organization might want to say, okay, if you get this many chips at the end of the night, you could turn it in and win this prize. That would be illegal. So at this time, casino nights are still illegal, as are any kind of electronic gambling devices, video poker, slot machines or any sports betting. So right now, if it's a casino night where prizes are offered, you still cannot have that within the state. So one of the questions we actually got this from a couple of folks, is what if you registered to have a raffle, but you didn't actually have one, say during COVID or because of the pandemic you weren't able to have it? Would you still need to file a raffle financial report? And the answer to that is yes, but you can record on the report that you actually did not have any raffles, but you still need to submit the report to our office. Another question that we received was, do you have to record exempt raffles on the financial report? And the answer to that is no, you would just do your non-exempt raffles, even if you held both exempt and non-exempt raffles during the year. Another question we got is, can you have online sales of raffle tickets? And the answer to that is yes, you can sell raffle tickets online. And another question we got that's similar along that line is whether or not you can have credit card sales for raffles. Can you sell your tickets using a credit card given that a credit card company would be considered a third-party processor, and that is not prohibited. Now, if you had like an exorbitant processing fees, or you had a broker and it was something other than your typical credit card processing fees, we might take a look at that. But just credit card sales in and of themselves are not illegal. You can use a credit card you can take credit cards to sell your tickets. And then also one last question, if you have multiple options to win at a single event, does that count as one raffle? And the answer to that is yes, if you're selling all the tickets sold go to that one event. So like if you have a drawing for multiple prizes, if you sell all the tickets, would be eligible potentially to win one of those prizes, it would be considered one event. Okay, so one last thing, here's our contact information. As I mentioned before, if you have a question, you can always submit it to charities@sos.sc.gov. And we also are listing our phone number and our website on this slide. So please feel free to contact us at any time, and we'd be happy to help. At this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Secretary Hammond. Thank you.
I hope you found this webinar informative, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our IT staff for putting this presentation together. I appreciate everything that the nonprofits do for our state, for our communities, for our country, and it's been very trying times. So thank you for all of your hard work. If you are suspicious of any raffles and want to contact the office to inform us of those raffles, please do so. And you can also notify us through a confidential complaint form. We want everyone to play by the same rules. Thank you so much for watching this presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.